Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Halfway Cafe. This is my podcast, Brain Milk. I got Ben Ulansey here. You want to talk about all of the things you do real quick for people tuning in who maybe don't know who you are?
So I've got a pretty mixed publication here on Substack called the Gen Z Report, where I do a lot of cultural analysis, film review, philosophical writing, political writing. It's pretty all over the place, and it's been a little bit hard to establish my brand, but it's been a whole lot of fun so far.
Okay.
And
And
on Medium, I'm on a publication as well called Thought Thinkers.
okay. Yeah, you kind of straddle Gen Z and millennials, right? You're kind of like right on the cusp of
Yep.
two generations. Yeah. Do you ever feel like when you read commentary online that it's like, oh, millennials this, or like the kind of like tit for tat, like millennials are so cringe when it comes from like a Gen Z writer? Like, do you feel like you pick a side when you see things like that, or are you kind of above the fray?
I am usually pretty willing to relent on our own generation just because of what a crazy world we've grown up in. I do always get frustrated when people are like, "Oh my God, you guys are so entitled." Da da da. So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely do have my feelings there.
Yeah, I've always thought about that, like the idea that like we're entitled is like, the joke that like boomers were able to buy a house for like a pack of blueberry. and now their
Right,
houses
right.
and now their houses are worth like $1.5 million and things like that. So it's weird to call like a generation entitled like for that reason. But on the other hand, it's like the technology has progressed so much that like our standard of living is so much higher than like somebody who grew up in the 70s, the
Yeah.
fact that you just have endless entertainment. You can buy cheap knockoff stuff from China and, comes right to your house. Like life is pretty convenient and good. And it's a weird thing where it's like, back in the 70s to buy a TV was like a big expense, when computers first came out in the 80s, huge expense. Whereas now it's like for millennials and Gen Z, it's like the biggest expense is living and the house and everything else is relative, like to the point of entertainment. It's almost like free essentially, for
Yeah, and half of
pennies.
us have had to just completely give up on the idea of ever owning a house at this point. My grandpa's 98, and when he
Yeah.
tells me about the price that he paid for his original house,
Yeah.
oh my god. I think he told me it was $15,000 for a house that's now going for, like, 1.2 million. Unthinkable.
Yeah. Right. And at a certain point, the real estate value kind of means nothing. Like if, it's like you look at pictures of like houses in San Francisco, they're like, $2 million. And it's like, what would, you could buy rent in like a small town in Missouri, like the same size house for like $400 a month. But it's like
Mm.
the real estate values are just like really insane. But I will say, like, in terms of like owning a house, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing that so many people won't. I guess it'll be like some degree of exploitation. But like my house flooded recently. And so now I'm getting like all the joys of homeownership where it's like, shit, everything that happens, I'm responsible for,
Yeah.
and like if I add up everything that I've had to do for this house, like definitely paying more than I would have rented it for. So I don't know. I guess there's two sides to everything.
Yeah, the more you, become an adult, the more you realize that everything has its caveats. Like,
Yeah.
if you're renting, it's got its downsides. If you have a condo, it's got its downsides, and my parents right now are dealing with the new roof struggle, so yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I did my
Yeah.
best to, chip in for that struggle, but yeah, it's a $50,000 ordeal for some of these homeowner expenses sometimes, so it's
Yeah. Oh,
just
yeah. For
ugh.
real. Where do you live again? You're on East Coast time.
Yep, I'm in, just outside of Philadelphia. I forget where
Oh,
you're from
nice.
again?
Okay. I live in Missouri. I live in
Okay.
the middle of Missouri.
Mhm.
I guess right off the top of the bat, do you have any thoughts on the Trump will he, won't he bomb Iran? Like we're kind of in this weird space where like literally nobody knows what Trump's going to do. There might be a third Middle East war tomorrow. It's like this morning I like woke up. It's like, do I even want to look at my cell phone? Like, do I want to check Twitter and see that like Trump just popped off, to like he got upset for a moment about his military
Yeah.
parade being sleepy and now he's sending a bunch of missiles.
I I think something that's kind of helped to keep me sane these past few months that he's been in office is trying to parse between what is noise and what is actually something to be worried about. And it's tough for me to necessarily say that this is only noise, but at the moment, that's the category that I'm putting it in. It's it kind of feels a little bit to me like when he was talking about Biden being a robot the other week. Like I and we all harp on this and say, "Oh my God, how crazy it is it that a world leader says this?" And meanwhile, he's doing three more nefarious things behind the scenes. And
No, yeah, yeah,
I wouldn't rule out Trump starting World War III. Certainly, he's brash enough to do it, but at the
yeah,
moment, it there have been a lot of times in the past decade where we've been worried about World War III breaking out where it hasn't. And I do also take solace in the fact that Trump was one of the least pro-war presidents when he entered politics. He was one of
yeah.
the first people to actually denounce the Iraq War.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. Pretty ballsy in 2016.
Yeah.
But I guess it worked to like demolish Jeb Bush, kind of
Yeah,
put the whole, it's like number one competitor in the primary, essentially, I guess.
that
Just bury him under that.
Yeah, that is one of the very, very rare positives that I would objectively attribute to Trump. I think that before then, people had at least in the Republican Party, had a very, very hard time denouncing those two wars. And he was the
Yeah.
first one to just say, no, this wasn't a good idea. And you could even see on the stage at the time as Republicans were like, wait, what do I do right now? What am I supposed to?
Yeah. He's not supposed to say that. Yeah. It is kind of true that Trump does see himself as a peace candidate or a peace president. Like, I guess, it comes down to like who talks to him last before he like hits the nuke
Mm,
button or puts it away. Like maybe Steve Bannon can talk him out of starting a war. I think a lot of his base, is a little antsy and pissed off at the idea that Trump would start a war when, like their whole agenda is like domestic focus, like let's deport a
yeah.
bunch of people and then starting a whole new war for a lot of those people who have been blaming. It's kind of like the both sides, like both parties are the same. It's like, well, I guess, it's Republicans who always start the wars, but I don't know. Maybe he likes being like referred to as the peace president, and then maybe the kind of like extreme isolationist in the party will convince him. Maybe Fox News, maybe Tucker Carlson. Did you see that clip of Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz?
I did, and it was one
Okay,
of
yeah.
those really weird redemption arc type moments. I'm like, wait, this is really Tucker
Oh
Carlson
no,
right now?
not
He's
redemption, not redemption. He had, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's more of like a broken clock is right like twice a day
Yeah,
kind of thing
yeah,
with Tucker Carlson.
that's a good point.
But
Yeah,
everybody hates Ted Cruz. Like I remember, like George W. Bush was talking about, like called him like the biggest son of a bitch in the first, I guess, President Bush's presidency. He was some kind of like judge or solicitor, something in
yeah.
like more judicial aspects. But literally everybody hated Ted Cruz, and I think Lindsey Graham's famous quote that like if you murdered him in the Senate and then you put him on trial in the Senate, you couldn't you couldn't get all the senators to convict him. So
It, it
it's
would
like
be it would be
it's
much
definitely
more
Schadenfreude.
meaningful. It would be much more meaningful coming from any senator besides Lindsey Graham, the second most hated
Yeah.
man in all of the Senate.
Yeah, well, Al
Oh man.
Franken had that great quote too, where he said, "I like Ted Cruz more than almost anybody in the Senate, and I hate Ted Cruz." I love that. Did you? What were your impressions of all of the Trump parades and or the anti-Trump parades and the No Kings protests? Did you like the iconography? Was it pretty cool how big they were compared to how sleepy Trump's parade was?
Yeah, I can't imagine that Trump feels pleased with how that day turned out. I think that he had hoped that either the No Kings protests would become so violent that he would be forced to call in the National Guard and the day would take that direction, or that the military parade would be wildly successful. But I think that he got neither of those wishes. That it was largely
Yeah,
peaceful protests across the country that didn't make him look terrifically good.
no, that's very true. Did you go to one?
I tried to actually. I was given the wrong time for one of our local
Oh,
parades.
damn.
I feel bad about it.
Did you have a sign or anything, or
No,
outfit
no.
or costume? No. Okay.
I showed up completely unprepared, and it was just at the tail end of this house sitting job I'd been on for a week, so it was already a question of whether I was going to make it in time. But I tried. The effort was there.
Yeah, I wanted to go to one. There was one, but with my house flooding and taking care of that, and it's just like the day got away from me. But I'm glad a lot of people did go. I definitely liked seeing the footage and the videos of it.
I live
Um,
I live in a relatively small town, and even the protest that we arranged locally, I saw pictures of it, and it was pretty colossal. Like I've never seen anything like that in the town.
Yeah, and I liked how serious the organizers were about like bring American flags. I think that was like getting a little muddy with like the Mexican flag thing. It's like I get what you're going for, but like also like the No Kings is like really good branding where it's like it's not a partisan thing. Like No Kings, America's been telling kings and wannabe kings to fuck off since 1776. So, great. If you get in the mud and everyone's got Mexican flags, it makes it way easier for Fox News to demagogic, things like that. So that's kind of I won't do too much politics. I do politics all the time, but I just wanted to get those out the top. But I'm kind of more curious on this conversation being more about like social media and culture. And I was just, I guess, to start off, how would you describe your presence online? Like, how do you? I guess maybe a good example would be like what's the algorithm feed you? Like, if you open up Instagram and the For You page, or insert any social media company, like what kind of content generally does the algorithm know you want, even if you don't know you want it?
It's I'm ashamed to say that I've made a very concerted point to never follow any of those sexy Instagram model accounts over the years. But man, the algorithm just starts feeding it to you
Yeah,
regardless,
yeah, I
and
know.
it kind of feels disrespectful in a way because it
Yeah,
knows
yeah,
your male instinct to just like, okay, well, watch the sexy video, da da da, and then just keep scrolling. But yeah, it's gotten to the point where if I'm opening Instagram, the models are pretty ubiquitous, and I wish that weren't the case. I think that my social media rather my Instagram and Facebook experiences have gotten so completely vapid that I really can't justify any of the time that I spend there, at least
yeah.
scrolling. Like,
Yeah. No, that's very funny. I definitely have that on Instagram. There must be something about Instagram that is like a little predatory in a way,
yeah, it is
It's you
because
just yeah,
because
there's a
yeah,
lot of
I've made
videos. Yeah, go
because
ahead.
I've made such a concerted a point to avoid this, and I think it's so silly how many people just follow like 200 of those accounts, and yeah, they still just
Yeah,
get
yeah.
you. They rope
Yeah.
you in regardless.
I do find it hilarious when you see like the friend from high school on Facebook that like befriends those like obvious bot profiles
Right.
where it's like some girl with just big boobs and she has like seven friends. It's like your dumbest friend that fell for it.
Or or boomers who just have no idea that the things they do on social media are public, and
Yeah, yeah.
when they like this shit, it's public. Like,
Yeah.
so and
The
so likes
comments
bodacious blondes.
yeah, yeah. The comments that are like clearly written by like some Russian like troll for like a bot farm to make click money or something, and you get like some boomer like responding to all the rhetorical questions from these fake and now increasingly like AI hot girl. It's
Right.
it's very amusing. Yeah. Instagram is the worst, man. That it's like I don't really use Instagram. I'm like a pretty bad millennial in that sense. I just have never been that much into Instagram. It seems like the commentary and criticism of it being like so fake and like Instagram perfect and
Yeah.
so like Hollywood style, like everything with the lighting and the wardrobe and how many takes they probably had. Like it all just seems so fake to me. So I've never been into that, but I have been finding myself reading Substack a lot, actually. So, I mean, plug to the platform we're on currently, but I mean, not just because it's been pretty good for me in like building up an audience, but I really do find that Substack being so new, there's like no gatekeepers, which is really nice. So, like, everybody's kind of on an equal footing right now as it starts growing. And so, and I've noticed even like the Halfway Cafe that I write, like, if I get like one paid subscriber a day, it's like enough to get me into like the top 30 like rising chart or whatever of humor, which is kind of interesting and cool and I guess easy in a way. But what are your thoughts on the kind of level playing field of Substack without the gatekeepers? Like even the institutional media companies are on there. Like, I go through, I'm like surprised at like, oh, really big comedians. They're like not bigger than I am. And, I don't think I'm necessarily like wildly successful or anything, but any thoughts on any of those comments?
I would say that I've got some pretty conflicting opinions on Substack. It's on one hand, like you say, it's very exciting to be on the platform as it's growing, and I've definitely experienced that. But it's I don't know. I think that it gets a bit falsely hailed as this utopia for free speech and all these things it's doing right,
Yeah.
and I see so much shitty content rising to the top, and I'm always delighted to see people who actually earn their success rising in the ranks because so much of what I see is people just their success is from writing about success or from being as
Yeah.
angry and vitriolic about politics as they can manage. And yeah, it's I definitely don't feel as though it's presented as a very viable future for me just yet. I think that it might ultimately get there, but yeah, it's been hard for me to accrue those pay subscribers. It's certainly not on a one per day basis yet.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't know. What's your I guess I have a lot of questions about like kind of your creative control and what you're doing and what your goals are. But I guess first off, like on that last point, I was kind of struck by the idea. Did you ever use Tumblr back in the day? I know
No, that
Tumblr's
one
like
actually
had
kind of missed me as well.
Oh, okay. But like Substack's actually quite a bit like Tumblr, but like kind of for adults. Like Tumblr very
Mhm.
much was like, you know, like teenagers and high schoolers, and a lot of it was like the like I started using Tumblr like in college. So this was probably like 2012-ish or something. And you know, just a lot of like very interesting stuff. But Tumblr allowed you to do like all medium. So you could post photos, videos, audio, like literally just anything you could post. And Substack's kind of doing that. And at first I was like, I don't know if Substack should try to be an everything app. I don't know if that's going to be good if it just does a kind of worse version of all the other social media. Like Facebook has done that, right? With like Meta, where they
Yeah.
try to just do everything and then they do it worse. They do video worse than TikTok. They do reels worse than Instagram. They do, you know, commentary worse than Twitter. And, you know, I guess I would be weary about Substack kind of falling into that mold, but it's so new. You know, it's like watching the Plinko bounce around. You know, we don't know, you know, how it'll play out ultimately, but I'm kind of curious to see where it goes.
I can answer that, but it is occurring to me that as the sun sets, it's probably I should probably turn on the light in here.
Oh,
One second.
okay. Yeah, go for it. You got some nice stained glass, by the way, back there. You got a nice backdrop with the.
I had somebody comment on that background, and ever since then, I've been making use of it.
Oh, yeah. It is.
It's been
It's
the
aesthetically pleasing.
yeah, it's been the go-to background ever since. But to answer your question, I think that I've watched a similar trend happen with these live videos that I observed with notes to begin with. It seemed for a bit that everyone was saying, "Oh, notes, notes, notes. This is the only vehicle for success." And for a while, I think that that was true until so many people from so many other platforms started coming into the mix, and I've watched as at least with my own notes, I've watched as the engagement has fallen pretty dramatically since the election. And live videos, I think we've seen a similar trend too now, where people have kind of come to the conclusion that these are necessary for growth on Substack. And as much as I love the feature, I really, really do actually appreciate Substack and what they've done with this. I think that they've really kind of nailed this feature. But I do see an element of oversaturation settling in where so many people are going live at the top of every hour. I'm
Yeah.
getting three
Well, yeah,
notifications
that's
about
true.
three new lives, and it's a lot.
Yeah, I did see, like, I made the decision to not email people when I do these lives, and I feel like other people I've seen on Substack comment that, like, it makes them lose followers when they email people on lives, and I kinda get that because, like, if I was reading my own content, I wouldn't want more than you know, I feel like sometimes when I post like 5, sometimes 6 times a week, you know, maybe that's too many emails, but then if I'm also adding on like the live. So for now, I'm kind of interested in just having it be like a if you're live and catch it kind of thing. And I'll post it and like
Yeah,
have it, but I won't like send out an email specifically for that. So in terms of the notes, do you think it's kind of like a new Twitter? Because like I kind of like notes a lot because it's replacing Twitter, but like the average um, education level of Substack users is way high. Like Substack
yeah,
is such an interesting niche of writers and like thoughtful intellectual people that like right now I am really kind of impressed with the level of content that I see on Substack. And so if you do kind of replace with notes like Twitter, but it's just like back to like historians and like thought leaders and culturally introspective people. Like I think that's probably a win. And you know, it's still early. Maybe Substack can still become a cesspool of trash, but as of right now, I think you know it's like attracting like really smart, good people and people that are actually interested in writing. I will say I don't necessarily find notes like necessarily leading to a lot of subscribers. I have no idea. I don't know if the analytics even show you if like you get you know how much your subscribers come from notes. But for me, as like with the satire that I write, where I just copy and paste like my headlines like to like 7 places, and Substack notes just being one of them, it's like kind of pretty easy, I guess, and it keeps a lot of engagement with my fans, I guess, or audience with the if they don't follow me on Twitter for good reason or anywhere else, you know. I guess
Yeah.
I didn't have a question there, but
No. Yes.
um,
Uh,
let's see. Now I'm kind of interested. I'm going to ask you just a couple questions. Some reactions I had, some of the writing that you've been doing. Do you try to write like every day, right? Do you try to post something every day? Do you ever give yourself like a break?
for a while, I've grabbed, or initially I was doing more of a article per day approach, but I would say as time's gone on, I've gravitated toward more of a quality over quantity approach.
That's good. Do you have any goals of like a certain number per week, or do I'm asking because I'm like very interested in how like artists optimize like their
Mm.
careers, because this is something I've been really focused on in like the last 6 months. So I'm just curious about any tips or like strategies that work for you to just like be focused and like put out professional output. You know.
I try not to do less than 2 articles per week, and man, as far as tips go, it's I wish that I had more in that regard for people. I'm so at the mercy of flow state, and it's such a funny thing sometimes because there are times where you have got all the motivation in the world to sit down at your computer and write, and it just isn't coming out in a very useful way, and you know that the time would just be better spent later that day. Or and then there are times where it's the least convenient moment possible. You're driving or something, and thoughts just start flowing. That's a very recurrent theme for
Yeah.
me. Like,
Oh yeah, that's happened to me several times where like, especially doing like the, frequent tweeting of like the satirical news, where I'll have like when I'm driving, I'll have some idea that like, oh, that is genius. I could do that like on a weekly basis. It could be a recurring joke. And then I forget it immediately. It's like
right, right.
the idea that I was like, oh, that'll make me, so much cloud or something. It's like gone into the ether. But um, do you like when you are creating, would you say do you get writer's block, or do you even believe in writer's block? Some people say it doesn't exist. It's just like you're not sitting in front of the keyboard trying to type something.
For a long time, writer's block wasn't a force for me at all, and I think that I've experienced more of it as I've accrued more of an audience, and that's a bit sad to me because you do get self-conscious about those things that might land with your subscribers and might not. And when I look back at some of my earliest writing on Medium, I see somebody who was a lot more adventurous and willing to take risks, even if I don't think the writing is as good then as it is now.
Would you say it's like a little bit of audience trap where like you're kind of beholden to giving like, your audience what they expect from you, and if you stray, they lose interest? Is it like that kind of thing?
I'm already shoving quite a lot of things under an umbrella, and it feels a bit crowded under there to
Yeah,
begin with.
I got
And
you.
there are more things that I enjoy writing about that I just feel people would wonder, what the hell is this kid doing at this point?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I still like, I started this like brain meld podcast I've been doing for a while, and it's like I still don't really know, like, do I make a new Substack? Do I make it its own brand? Do I keep it like even the Halfway Cafe? Like my main satire site was the Halfway Post, and so I started the Halfway Cafe to like write everything, not just like political comedy. But then obviously, like I publish some of my poems and stuff, and like for good reason, no one gives a shit. You
Yeah,
um, but but on the other hand, like I don't know, I guess with there, it's nice that I picked politics as like my, because I can just scroll the news and I find like all these ideas to write about. So it helps prevent writer's block, because it's like, Ted Cruz will say something stupid, or like insert any person will do something dumb, and now I have something to joke about. And but it is kind of interesting, and I think I would give my audience a lot of credit because I do write a lot of crazy shit, like
yeah.
real long diatribes about Josh Hawley being obsessed with masturbation. I wrote like a long diatribe of a planet. I invented a planet of cannibal Ted Cruzes, where they just like very scientifically accurate and graphic depictions of like what a world of Ted Cruzes with no food would be like, just like rampant cannibalism and wearing each other's skins as like clothes. So sometimes I like, it makes me, I often laugh when I'm writing. Like I
Yeah.
make, I write the things that I want to read, and I'm just happy that there's a lot of people with a warped sense of humor. like me that appreciate what I write. But
Yeah, I really
um,
admire your ability to turn out satire. I think I told you this before, but it's definitely one of the ones that I find myself beginning and quitting the most often. I
oh,
start a
really?
piece and it doesn't quite rise to the level of humor that I want to convey, and I just yeah,
Yeah,
this one isn't working. I'll move on to the next one. But
right.
occasionally for me, satire is the very most rewarding, and I'll be cracking myself up while typing out the jokes, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
when you know that it's gonna
right.
be a hit with people usually.
Yeah, I have been doing it for like 7 or 8 years. I started in 2017, but like definitely, if you go to my website and look at my earliest articles, it's like clearly like most of the, some of them are winners, a lot of them are not. I've deleted some of
Mhm.
like the really worst ones,
Yeah.
a little bit over the years, but I definitely have gotten better at like, oh, my joke was really just the headline and I can't flush this out. But part I don't know if it's necessarily lazy, but like it's sometimes it's a format relatively easy that a lot of my articles are like just bullet lists of funny things, and then I'll just sit there cracking myself up, just coming up with like little bullets and a little easier to write. What kind of subjects do you think work the best that you write with people versus like for me, and for instance, like most of the posts or something, especially like headline like my tweets, the thing that I will think is genius goes nowhere. It's not
Mhm.
popular. No one reacts to it. And then like oftentimes the thing like I don't put any thought in. I'm like, I just haven't tweeted in a while. I got to put it out. Like that'll go viral. Do you have any of that? Are you ever overwhelmed or underwhelmed by your responses from your writing?
Yeah, I've had a bit more luck with entertainment on here than I ever expected to, and inversely, a bit luck just this past week with this piece I wrote called "The Arc of the Age" that I really put quite a lot of thought into, and it didn't bomb. It got some decent reception, especially on Medium, but yeah, on Substack, I was a little bit surprised by the lack of reception for that one.
Yeah,
So
it can hurt. It's like, the equivalent of, like, killing your babies when you have to, like, edit out a lot of your writing, but it's also like watching your baby
yeah,
starve as you
right.
put out good writing, that kind of thing. Um,
That's a great analogy.
yeah, I just made that up on the top of my head, so, let's see. Do you ever write by hand? Do you write only digitally?
It's
Do you ever write
so
anything longhand?
It's so funny sometimes to tell people I'm a writer if it ever comes to me actually using handwriting for anything because it's like I promise I'm good on the keyboard. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
been it's been so long since I've actually had to rely on my handwriting that it has fallen apart. I was certainly better when I was still in high school at writing than I am now. I never learned
yeah.
cursive. I was kind of in between
Really?
generations where it was never, essential for us. They kind of half-assed taught us for 1 semester, and it took for, like, maybe 10 to 20% of us, but for me, I think it's such a silly thing. I kind of try to make a joke of signatures whenever I write one and just literally satirize what signatures even are, just whatever
Yeah,
the
it kinda
fuck.
doesn't matter. I don't think any like, McDonald's is not gonna take your
Right.
or not gonna take your money because you drew a picture instead of a signature. That's interesting with the cursive. I like to think about like, when you read about like history and stuff and all these figures that they just do you think there's something in society that we miss that we don't die with just like lockers and chests full of letters that were handwritten and thought out? Is it better that, we're just so much faster and we can have so much more communication online? Do we miss anything from not having those letters and, calligraphy and cursive and all that?
I think that you lose something at the same time that you gain something. Uh,
Yeah.
for example, I think that what you gain is the ability to have ready access to tools like Grammarly and the ability to ask ChatGPT, what are 15 words for this sentence that would serve better than the one that I've used already? And I think that it's also kind of like GPS, where we've grown so reliant on maps on our phone that we just when we try to function without them, we really struggle. And
Yeah.
yeah, for me, when I actually like, I've certainly lost the skill to just handwrite, and there is something that's lost there. I think that I was probably a little bit better at retaining details back in high school when I took notes in class and whatnot.
Yeah, I think I have too much like ADD to write by hand because it's so
Mhm.
slow, and I change my mind. I'm just like my delete key probably is like worn down the fastest. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because it's like, yeah, what do you lose? Like, I guess like some people swear by it. Like some people will write an entire novel, like 90,000 words by hand and then they'll type it up. And I guess power to you, but my fingers move so fast and they still can't keep up with like the million thoughts and conflicting and ideas that I have. So I don't know. It doesn't work for me. Speaking of GPS, though, I wanted to point out like a funny idea that like when we have kids, it'll be so funny. Like, oh yeah, we had to like print out MapQuest directions and then while we're driving, be looking at a map or like a bigger map. And I remember my mom having to like get out the giant map of the city and like find the route to like my friends' birthday parties at their houses when I was a kid. And then yeah, you remember like, just even getting directions from people. I used to be a swimmer and I remember we would have swim meets and like the swim coach would just give us like in like by today's standards, insane directions of like, yeah, you go like 40 miles down this highway, turn left at the big tree, like things like that. Where it's like,
Oh my
but like people did that for like millennia, And it's like nowadays it's insane to think about like how complicated it was. Or like literally you're like in traffic about to hit other cars while you're trying to like remember which MapQuest direction you haven't already done.
Yeah, our relationship with maps is really one of the funniest generational divides. Because yeah, to even think back to MapQuest now, it just feels absolutely antiquated. Like, oh
Yeah.
man, the idea of telling my kids that they're gonna be like, wait, really? You had to print out directions?
Yeah, yeah, right.
And and meanwhile, my parents are like, man, you don't freaking know the half of it.
Yeah. I remember
Like,
the first GPS that we had, it would, like, get you mostly there, but then it was, like, not pinpoint enough, so, like, the last, like, 100 yards or a quarter mile or something would just make you go in circles around a place until you figured out, like, the sign of where you're trying to go. I had many moments of that.
oh yeah, the early
Um,
GPS days were also something to behold. I'll never forget my dad's original GPS. They would say recalculating in the most weird robotic
yeah.
voice. And one time
Right.
we took it on vacation and we were all the way out in Las Vegas and it said turn right onto Frank Sinatra Boulevard.
Yeah. All the mispronunciations,
Right.
yeah. In other news, the Beach Boy, Brian Wilson
Mhm.
died. I think you had like a tribute to him, right? Were you a pretty big Beach Boys fan throughout your life?
I'm not a colossal Beach Boys fan in the way that I am for the Beatles, but they've got enough songs that I can call myself a fan.
Okay.
They don't have any albums for me that are, no skips, as they say. But
Yeah.
but their best music really is transcendent. The song, "Good Vibrations," I Can Hear Music, in My Room, Wouldn't It Be Nice was a really special one for me as a kid.
Yeah. No, I listened to Pet Sounds again.
Great one.
The Beach Boys never really did a whole lot for me. And granted, not my generation, not necessarily for me, but I'm definitely a Beatles person for sure. I could probably teach like a class on the Beatles or
Ah,
rant
yeah.
professorially at somebody for
Yep.
like an hour. I'm a total Beatles fan. Um,
Yeah,
do you
I
have any,
wrote
what's your favorite Beatle? Are you a Paul, John, George, Ringo person?
So I've come to the conclusion as an adult that George Harrison is the most Beatlesy Beatle.
We talked about this the last time we had a podcast, actually. Did I bring this up?
It's
Or am I?
possible. It's
Okay.
I have told people this before. I'm not sure if we got into this last time or not, but yeah, I'm certainly a huge Beatles fan. I wrote an article on Substack not all that long ago called I think the song that got me into music about "Help" and
Oh,
playing
yeah.
playing it repeatedly as I circled the cabin floor of my parents' lake house. And
Yeah. Help is like the quintessential Beatles song from like the first half of their career. Like so creative with the harmonies singing
yeah,
prior to John singing like the lead vocal is very interesting and just the subject matter. And then it's just so fun and poppy and like so perfectly produced. Um, do you like early Beatles or later Beatles more?
certainly later Beatles as a psychedelics
Uh,
proponent.
yeah, yeah. When they get a little more creative. It's interesting to think, do you have, like, a theory on why they broke up? I heard somebody reference that, like, maybe it was, like, Louis CK or somebody, but basically that, like, it started becoming more Paul's band when like John was the oldest and like early on he was kind of like the center of the band. And then starting in like 65, like Paul is just such a workhorse and is just was so inventive, like in the studio as well as all the instruments. And just he was like, when you watch like Get Back, like did you see that movie? Where like you can just tell Paul's the one like, come on boys, let's sit down and get to work, like kind of the driving energy of the band. And so maybe just, John like kind of checked out, started doing more drugs, lost interest, and then like kind of maybe resented the fact that his band kind of got taken over by Paul, maybe. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's kind of one of those things that's a little bit like the JFK assassination, where people don't feel like violently one way or the other, but people have got strong opinions on what happened exactly. For me, I'm thankful that they produced so much in the years that they were a band that I've never really given a whole lot of thought to their breakup. And I really love some of the songs around their breakup too. Real Love, Free as a Bird, uh, one or two others. But yeah, to answer your question more directly, I would say that I don't have a whole lot of thoughts there.
Oh, gotcha. My dad is really into the Beatles, and we have like we did a thing once where we tried to come up with like our top 10 lists, and it's very hard to come up with like the top 10 Beatles songs because there's so many good ones. It's like you kind of get to like a top 20 that like you think all
Yeah.
needs to be inside of it. But I think my favorite song though would be Carry That Weight. Just very interesting, like Abbey Road side 2. It's just so well produced. It's got a little bit of everything, like a great guitar solo. Ringo's awesome on the drums. I don't know.
The one the one that has most frequently topped my favorites list is, In My Life, but like you
Oh
say,
yeah.
it's tough to put it to a list, and it's a very fluctuating list.
Yeah. I yeah, I don't know. I could probably. Do you ever get this is one thing I get mad at people who say like the Rolling Stones are bigger than the Beatles or better or like things like that, like opinions like that. And to me it's just like I don't think you can possibly compare like any other group or musicians to the Beatles, just like such a super group at the right time. And they just so took over. And when you look at what like George Martin was doing with production, how they like literally revolutionized how songs were produced. And then on top of that, like prior to the Beatles, it wasn't really an expectation for anyone to write their own songs. And
Yeah.
then because of the Beatles, everyone had to start writing their own songs. And the fact that they were like so creative and so good. And like any one of them would have been like a stellar musician on their own, but they were all, like the fact that George Harrison was like the third best person in a band, kind of interesting.
Circling a little bit back to the Beach Boys, did you hear that, I forget if it was John or Paul that said the song, "God Only Knows" was, like, the single greatest song that they'd ever heard or something to that effect?
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. I think Brian Wilson was like the one person that Paul McCartney felt was like the most
Yeah.
competitive with the Beatles. And I think wasn't even what is it, back in the USSR was kind of like an homage to the Beach Boys, I think.
Mhm.
Probably a
Yeah.
couple other songs too. Um, let's see. What are your goals in terms of your writing? You don't have another job, right? Like you kind of support yourself full time right now with writing, right?
Yeah, this is the full-time job at the moment. I think I briefly began telling you last time that I've got some pretty darn lofty goals for the future. I'm thankful for whatever little impact that I can make in my corner of the world, but yeah, my hope is to really one day make a major difference in politics or the way people think or the cultural narrative. And it's it's certainly a lofty goal, and I try not to
What
be
does that
too
look like to you?
self-inflated. But
What does that look like to you in terms of like stepping stones?
I guess just accruing more and more of a following is the petty answer there. But I think a lot back to this piece that initially inspired me to join Medium 3 or 4 years ago now. It was called "Prepare for the Ultimate Gaslighting," and while I don't particularly love the title, it circled the world right as the pandemic started, and it just left such an impact on me and just felt like it had such a detailed understanding of where we were as a species that it made me wanna write and made me want to one day accomplish similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about like the ripple effect, you know? It's like
Yeah.
everything you write is having some effect that, you know, touches so many people in so many ways that it becomes a bigger thing years from now. Do you have any ideas in terms of like companies or publications, or are you just kind of open to like any which way your career could potentially go?
I think a lot of the reason that platforms like Medium and Substack have been so useful for me is that I really do have a pretty colossal disconnect around the whole marketing side of things and doing a lot of the things that really would be best for me in my career. I know that I should be pitching to more magazines and newspapers at that point, and realistically, that would be one of the best paths forward for me. But yeah, so far I've remained pretty focused on the social media route and really kind of appreciating the fact that this is a new generation of journalism that we're a part of.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on writing books or something concrete? Like I do think that like just posts, like a lot of little posts will, you know, be lost to time, but having something concrete like a book that can sit on a library shelf
Yeah.
or like your own shelf or whatever is a little more permanent and lasting.
That's another good example of something that I've felt a little bit like I was doing a lot more adventurous fiction writing back when I didn't have as much of a following to worry about. But I've felt a little bit resistant to writing fiction because I think if I were to just one day publish an excerpt from that my followers would be like, this is a fiction publication now?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, I
But
want to
you're
write a
right.
novel too, but it does come down to like the time thing where I'm making money from comedy and satire. It's like, well, obviously I need to keep that going, but then I also really want to write a novel, and I have this big idea, and I've written like 30 to 40,000 words, and I have like all these ideas that I've been
Mm,
like stacking up for like 3 years. And so like at some point, if I can get to a point comfortable like monetarily where I really can, you know, be a little more quality rather than quantity and post and stuff, I'll definitely take a crack at it. But yeah,
I
I've been
think
pretty successful so far. Like at least a book a year. So I've been publishing, you know, my comedy books. I've got two: satire in the Biden years, satire in the Trump years. I've got, I guess it's technically out now, but I haven't really publicized it yet. But I wrote a book called Trump Comedy, where I take the best of both those bigger, 4-year books. And so there's like a smaller 100-page, just all Trump comedy, like making fun of him. And I think we're in a pretty good moment. So like I'm getting the proof back from like Amazon like tomorrow, I think, actually, like the author copy or whatever, to check the printing. But I don't know. I think for this second Trump term, I'm going to be a little more diligent about selling the books that I've written about Trump. And hopefully it works out. I guess it's a good thing he got reelected, because a lot of my comedy still lasts. I mean, it's bad. It's terrible for America, in my humble opinion. But, you
yeah.
know, in terms of like satire, it's going to be feasting years for a while because Trump's like so insane.
Yeah, me and a
Um,
few of my friends who cover politics were sitting around before the election and pretty much coming to the terms with the fact that yeah, Trump's election would be horrible for the country, and none of us wanted it, but certainly good for the people who cover slash satirize politics.
Yeah, and in everything with a certain amount of chaos, you just don't know what'll happen. So, hopefully, at the end of all this Trumpian chaos, I'm a little more established as like a
Yeah,
household name of a satirist. Like, I do think at a certain point, I've got to be probably up there on the internet in terms of like people who just shitpost and troll Trump and Republicans all day long. Like I have, and like just my style has. I've been doing it for 8 years. My style is so specific, I think, and like I think maybe if you just were showed one of my posts and you knew me, like you'd tell right away, oh, that's
yeah.
that's a halfway post. So I don't know, fingers crossed. Let's see. How do you think about branding? Do you have any thoughts on like branding yourself? I know you just said like you maybe don't think enough about like the business side, but that's something, like I said, I've been trying to professionalize like my systems and processes of writing and output and things like that. And that's the thing I'm not really good at either, but I'm trying to get better at. But do you like thought thinkers? Do you like your own name? Like, how do you see branding long term for yourself?
I've gotten vaguely better at it in the years since I've begun writing, but I think a lot of the reason why I haven't fully connected with Substack just yet is a lot of the difficulty I still have around establishing a brand and turning myself into a product. I think what I do ultimately prefer about the payout scheme on Medium is that none of that is left up to you, and the success of your article is what determines payout. Here, it's been very tricky for me to just figure out the way to say, okay, here's exactly what I'm selling, and here's why you should buy it. And I, yeah, it's tricky. I'm gradually getting there, but it's a bit of a disconnect for me.
Medium worked for you? And like in terms of making money, is it getting your articles like posted by the algorithm and getting that like wider distribution? Is it just you have so many followers on Medium already that like enough paying members of Medium are reading your stuff so you get paid that way?
It's frustrating how much of your payout on the platform is determined by what's called the boost system. For those who aren't familiar with it, where essentially a team of staff members read over your article and determine, yeah, this reaches a certain standard. We're going to distribute this to the wider platform. And I'm one of the lucky people who's routinely continued meeting that standard and have continued getting paid for my articles as a result. But very often still, my articles are reviewed by those what are called curators, and they don't agree that it meets that standard. And as a result, articles earn $2 instead of $200.
How does that work? Do they review everything? Like how does does it have to get to a certain threshold before they'll look at it and maybe boost it? Do you know?
I'm what's called a nominator on Medium, which means if I read over an article that I believe meets that standard myself, then I submit the URL to Medium, then they review it and either give it the seal of approval or don't. But there's nothing I'm unable to send in. There's just a lot that I'm sure that they won't even consider, even if it is a certain standard. Sometimes if it's more controversial or more provocative or more
Yeah.
sexual, it's not even going to be considered.
Are you allowed to share like your own or nominate your own stuff?
Twice a month.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've had a few articles get that, but when I first started Medium, it started like blowing up really big, and I started getting like some pretty good viral action, and I started making like $2,000 to $3,000 a month, but it only lasted for like 4 or 5 months, and then it went down to like $300, and now I'm
Yeah.
kind of like $2 to $5 per article. But I don't really network on there as much, but I have some very dedicated fans on there that read everything, but I don't know. I still feel like most of my, and I guess it's like partisan, it's like the stuff I write is pretty partisan. It's pretty, a lot of it is, pretty, maybe graphic in terms of like, mocking people like Rudy Giuliani for their
Yeah.
sexual proclivities and things like that. So I totally understand why I'm not like boosted or whatever, but I don't know. It still seems to me like most of my viral action comes from like Twitter or Threads. And when I have a viral post, I'll put my articles underneath them and then get a lot of views that way. So that's kind of like my specific main driver of viewership.
Me and a couple of other humor writers on Medium have observed this pattern where if it's too funny, that's a problem. You want it to be chuckle funny, but not
Oh yeah.
laugh out loud funny.
Yeah.
If it's just enough where people are grinning through it, then yeah, curation's gonna love it. But if people are laughing their asses off, then they might consider a little too racy.
Well, yeah, maybe that's the case. I would definitely say most of my stuff's probably too racy for the mainstream medium viewer. Um, let's see. In terms of the internet phrase "go outside and touch grass," how much would you say you do that, or should you do it more?
I'm a
What's your
big
relaxing day away from the internet look like?
I'm a big touching grass proponent. I I don't know if it's something I should get into too deeply, but psychedelics have been very useful for me in life, and I think the two go hand in hand a little bit. To have the occasional mushroom or LSD trip and just go outside, appreciate nature for a day, it profoundly helpful for me in my writing.
You write under the influence a lot?
I get as far as notes in my phone or voice memos, but rarely anything that I can meaningfully flesh out while in the midst of it.
Okay. I take edibles a lot, and that definitely helps my creativity.
Yeah.
Like, especially if there's a drought, like if I have a drought, like sometimes I'll take an edible and I can like just pop out an article in like 45 minutes, like obscenely fast. But it definitely makes me more creative. It breaks down your latent processing or whatever,
Yep,
and
yep.
then you just think everything's significant and beautiful and interesting, and it definitely makes like the whatever gatekeepers in my brain are just way more open to like follow random zany ideas down, and that might make sense if people read some of my work. Might
A,
not be
a lot
surprising at all.
a lot of people forget that weed is technically categorized as a hallucinogen, and yeah, like you say, it can be a very stimulating drug. For me, it used to be more so, and over time, the creative component to weed has become a little bit more elusive, and I feel bad about that.
Well, it's the kind of thing if you do it too much too, it really
Yeah,
does sap you of like
exactly.
energy and ideas. And so sometimes I've noticed that where like I'll just take a little break. But then if I, especially when I travel for work and I'm going to a state where, it's not legal and I don't want to bring it or something like that. Um, it, and then I come back after a week free of it, it's like, bam, I get that, it's really good. But sometimes it can be like, you're just doing it too much and now you're just like kind of groggy all the time and it's not working well. But how do you use the chat functions of Substack? I notice you do that with the Gen Z report that you run. Do you find that useful? I haven't used the chat function at all. A couple people
Mm.
that I subscribe to randomly send things. I'm just curious. Like, I don't really have a read on like the best use of it yet.
I'm convinced that it's a pretty simple way to get a slightly heightened viewership on your articles. I don't think it's going to be a day and night thing, but someone told me that there are many Substack users whose email inboxes are so inundated, which I can certainly understand, that the chat is more optimal.
Yeah. Do you start a thread and I guess I need to look up like the mechanics of it more.
Yeah.
I'm like interested in the idea. I don't know what I would do. I don't want to just be like, hey, if you have ideas for headlines, send it to me and just like farm
What
out, my creativity or anything like that. But I'm intrigued to think of ways I could interact with people more.
what I would like to see my chat turn into isn't something that I've really been able to cultivate just yet, which is where people would really contribute to conversations and get into meaningful back and forths. And there have been a couple times where I've really asked people direct or more open ended questions, but yeah, it hasn't happened so far yet that I've really spurred the conversations that I've wanted to. I think part of that is that I initially paywalled the conversation and recently decided that I should remove that paywall. So at least I'm getting
Yeah.
more people commenting in there, but it's still not a very lively chat like I'd want.
How do you paywall your stuff? I kind of have like all my content free and it's kind of a voluntary thing. And I think like I just posted today something kind of like asking people to subscribe and I try to make it entertaining and funny. So like everything is entertaining. So even like me asking you to subscribe, I've got a bunch of jokes and stuff in there. But I don't know if, with my stuff, it's so politically oriented where I'm more concerned about like my ideas and humor getting out there that I'm more concerned about like quantity of people seeing my stuff rather than money at the moment. But it's just like the more I write and the more products I have, I'm like, man, maybe I should, especially because I do it like a full time job, like every day. If I'm not working any other job, I spend like literally 8 hours at least writing, publishing, interacting with people. So it's like, man, I think at some point, if people like this, like, I feel like I should probably like if somebody was
Yes.
smarter than me on business stuff, I'm sure like everything I do could be way more profitable, but I'm trying to figure out ways to support, my lifestyle of just shitting on Trump all day. And I think people like it. And hopefully I'm a distinct and unique enough voice that eventually, hopefully like just with, volunteerism kind of people subscribing, maybe I can make it work financially to just sit at home all day and, do this.
I've had more luck with that model than I ever expected to. Um, that anybody at all has been willing to voluntarily pay for me has been pretty incredible, to be honest. I wasn't really sure how that model would work in joining.
How
Um,
much you pay? I noticed you have like a couple discounts on your things, I think like 20%, 30%, 40%. I just leave like a full-time 50% off because I personally don't want to pay every writer I like $5. Like I don't make enough money to like pay 30 people $5. So 250 I feel like is a pretty good, if you're just buying me a coffee once a month for like me
Yeah.
making you laugh theoretically, like literally all day long with my notes and then like 5 times a week with like articles that I write. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah, I really think so. I think it frustrates me a little bit when people overvalue their writing on here and
Yeah,
act as though readers aren't torn between 100 different creators at this point.
right.
So I like to at least give people the option to pay less, and I sometimes I wonder if I should even go as high as 90% off offers, because I don't like to send a message that you're not helping me just because you're not able to spend so and so money. But at the same
Right.
time, I think I've heard the opposite argument where people will think, "Oh, does Ben think his writing is only worth 50 cents a month? Then maybe I'll treat it like it is."
Yeah,
And
that's true. Yeah. It is kind of like a charge for what you think you're worth kind of thing.
yeah,
And then oftentimes people believe the worth based on what you charge.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So
I
there's
I
definitely a
feel like,
psychology at play there.
yeah. I wonder too, I'm always curious about ways like social media should probably be paying creators more because you look at social media companies and it's like all of the users do all of the labor. And then, like, Facebook and Twitter, they keep all of the money from the advertisers essentially. Like, some of them have programs where they give some of the money, but obviously, like, 90% or more of the money stays with like the people who own the platforms,
Yeah,
right? But like, I wonder if in the future, all social media companies, maybe, I don't know if it's a law that you could design that will require them to do this, but just to pay the people that keep people on the platforms that then generate all of the advertising money. Like at a certain point, we're like free laborers, on all of, since like high school, posting these things and interacting with people and staying online, scrolling and seeing the ads that ultimately get placed on the feeds. But I'm always curious about like, I also think too, it's like, are we at some point recreating cable? You know how like you had to pay for like all the channels individually? Cable gets together and they have one giant service, right? Like Substack might do this. Medium kind of does it with their payment program where you basically pay into the giant pool and then all the writers get a portion of it based on their views or whatever. Like I wonder if Substack might do that because it's not sustainable. If Substack really wants to grow, you can't have a giant platform and scale it when every individual
yeah.
writer needs to be paid $5 per person per month. That's not sustainable. But I wonder if Substack will figure out some way to like cable packageify the experience.
Yeah, that's another thing that I feel like is one of the biggest dilemmas at the heart of Substack as it's continued to grow. It felt like a more viable thing back when fewer people were competing against one another, but now that so many people are coming over from TikTok and we've got all these different avenues of content creation, it's understandable that people are torn about how to spend their money and how many different creators they can support. And yeah, I would personally love to see them introduce a more medium-like pay model where if I am getting 50,000 views each month, I can be certain that some of that will equate to money, even if people aren't necessarily subscribing.
Yeah, no, that's very true. You recently had some beef with olives that lasted for a while, I saw. What's your beef with olives? You wanna clear the air here?
Fuck olives.
You hate olives? Okay. My wife is Greek, so I used to not like olives, but having a Greek wife and going to Greece many times, I have become very accustomed to olives, and now I like them. So I do think it's a bit of an acquired taste that you could learn to like.
I am dead that you asked me about the olives. It's so funny to me how I've just like become associated with olives on Substack just because of this one
Oh,
random fuck olives post one day, and now Lawrence Winterman keeps posting lives where he's just like eating olives and just like roasting me, and it's a whole culture now.
so you're not a
I've
not a
created a
big
monster.
martini guy, not a dirty martini guy.
Maybe there will come a day when when I like olives, but so far they are one of the few things that if they are in any meal of mine, they need to be removed.
Yeah. Are you able to eat around them, or does like anything tainted by the olive juice have to be thrown out?
Oh man, yeah, you might need to just throw out the whole pizza at that point. Like it's
Yeah. Um, let's see. You have Escapist Delights as well. That's like another publication that I think you started. Are you planning on doing anything with that? Like, what's
that's
your vision
a
with that?
that's a good question, and I think it you kind of got into this a little bit when you mentioned opening up another publication and not being quite sure the direction to take it. Right now, I decided it was a good idea for me to branch out and have all of my entertainment be under the Escapist Delights publication, and all of my entertainment or all of my non-entertainment be under the Gen Z report. But so far, I haven't actually made that transition and have, despite owning the publication and the URL, I'm still publishing everything under the Gen Z report.
Okay.
But
S In terms of, Gen Z, I had this thought, it was talking about how, like, teachers are, like, complaining about, like, I guess now even it's, like, Gen Alpha, like, the generation that now that Gen Z is actually kind of, like, upper 20s and, like, starting to have kids and stuff like that, but it's, like, increasingly kids are just so into screens that they are incapable of reading books and, like, long like, I I I don't have kids yet, obviously, but, like the idea that like everybody is cheating with ChatGPT and like kids, like there's no sense of using homework anymore because it'll all be ChatGPT and like kids are like, do you have any opinions on the generation in terms of like not just kids these days kind of thing? Because like if you go back to like ancient Greek times, people were complaining about kids these days, like
right,
back then and all the way till now. But at a certain point with like, I think something in our psychology literally is changing now. Kids that are
yeah,
like just natively digital and like let's say like in another 15 years, kids just like literally can't concentrate at all unless they have like 30 things flashing at them. It's like even things
yeah.
like I have friends, not to ramble too long, but I have friends that have like kids that are like 8, 6, 5, and they're like, oh, I only show them like shows from the 90s because it's got like, it's a moral to it typically. It's an arc of a story. It's not like, nowadays these kid shows are just like they like put a bunch of kids watching it and like anytime they look away for a second, like change that content, make it more flashy, do something to keep them engaged, like literally 100% of the time. And I do wonder if like the kids these days might like when we are old and we look at like our grandkids, if maybe a kids these days thing might actually be real for once of just like it's like at a certain point, it's like kind of not genetically or biologically a different species, but psychologically maybe a different species than certainly what we grew up with in like a kind of still analog childhood.
No, I really love the idea you're getting into there because there's a term that I constantly use in thinking about who we are now. I think that we are digital creatures at this point. Like the extent to which our generation has spent our entire lives on these devices, we are not literally different beings evolutionarily, but the way that our minds function is so
Right.
different that it almost feels like a lie to call us the same. And it frustrates me sometimes when boomers just say, "Oh yeah, the kids these days, da da da." Like we didn't have these really addictive devices imposed on us, not imposed necessarily, but introduced to us before we knew any of the side effects that would ultimately result from them down the road. It was just we one day thought about iPhones and then the next they're in all of our pockets. And my parents, I've watched them become more digital as life has gone on for them, but I've never really I don't think they really grapple with what it's been like for our generation to be so attached to them from such a young age that it affects our brain chemistry. And yeah, it's to reach adulthood and not have a thing like the internet available, not have the iPhones, not have any of that. I think that they really did luck out in a way that we didn't. And yeah, different brains these days.
Yeah, because I mean, I think about like the 1960s, 1970s of just like the comparison or the contrast rather of how much content we have today versus like in the 70s, it's like you're watching TV all day, you're rotting your brain, but they're like slow half-hour episodes filled with like advertisements every commercial break. And it's like that, like the advertisements are like the most like interaction or like I guess that ADHD inducing change of content, in your
Mhm.
life. And like even like driving around, it's like now with Spotify, you have like the entire discography of like the human race of music, like at a touch. And like just, I think a lot about like truckers who probably just spent like decades just listening to like, terrestrial radio, three songs, commercial break, three songs, commercial break. And now it's like books on tape, podcasts, like there's so much content that like not only are we constantly surrounded by content, you will never watch even like a remote fraction of it. Whereas it used to be like, everybody watched like, there were three channels. So everybody was
Yeah.
mostly like the monoculture idea. Everybody was kind of watching the same things. And I'm just struck again with like just, how much content we have. And even like, even in terms of like porn, I heard a funny joke. Some comedian was talking about how it's like, I've probably seen more naked women in my life than all of my ancestors combined. And then he paused for a second. And he thought, well, I've also probably seen more dicks than all my ancestors combined. And it's like it's just like little things like that. It's like literally we have seen like more people than like all of our ancestors combined, right? We've seen, just more locations around the world. Like just scroll Instagram, you just see all these countries that like and places and people and hotels and like experiences that just 30 years ago no one would even like really imagine.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. It's the amount of content that we are just constantly faced with. It's not anything that our parents could even begin to understand when they were our age. And
Yeah.
yeah, the digital ecosystem that we live in today is just something that so little of humankind could have even imagined in the past. It's really kind of crazy to think about. And I look at my own ability to adapt, and the ChatGPT is one of the greatest examples for me. It was introduced one week, and I started messing around with it, and oh my god, this is unbelievable technology. And then literally the next, I'm like, oh my god, will this load a little bit faster? What the fuck?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Right.
and there's just nothing that we can't turn into something mundane in a week span, and it's crazy.
Do you think it makes us psychologically weird? Because I think it's definitely tied to like the rising depression, especially of like teenagers, but um, especially like the issues that teenage girls have, and just like in general, like everybody. But like the idea that you're just constantly scrolling, and like Facebook was a little bit of like you've seen everyone's like greatest hits, or like you see your friends who are on vacation or getting married or whatever. But now if like things like TikTok, you're constantly scrolling through like dream homes, vacations of the like billionaires doing all kinds of things, like people getting paid to go all these places and do all these things and wear all these clothes, try all these foods. And so like you're just so much, I literally feel like 50 years ago people were happier in that ignorance, whereas now it's like, especially when you look at the things of like like women not wanting to date anyone who's not like a billionaire or like going to take them on like dream romance vacations and things like that. And it's like you just scroll and see so much wealth and so much great experiences, even though most people will still never live that life. But now you just that it just gets in your head and that's what you want. And I think a lot too about like especially like the discourse about like dating and the apps and things like that. But like if you took, like your parents, like would they still be together if they were on the apps and doing dating? But like with like the two, like constant scrolling, even of human beings, like you're just constantly scrolling, next person swipe. It's like, will anybody be happy with anything ever again because you're just always aware of what things could be, and there's so many more people living better lives conspicuously?
And I think another reason that people are so depressed and despondent these days is just because we aren't meant to keep up with all of this. And there was a time
Yeah, yeah.
in the past when you did have the ability to not be aware of all of the negative things breaking out in the world. And now that we're so attuned to what's going on in Iraq and Iran and Israel, and it just leaves you feeling completely overwhelmed sometimes. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough for people.
Yeah, and especially with like the doom scrolling, like I get a little bit of this with politics. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my phone here to charge. But like, in politics, like it's like I think citizens were never supposed to just see their president shit tweet all day, right? Like Trump tweets all day long. Like citizens aren't supposed to do that. I think in terms of like the doom scrolling and like the depression of just like especially millennials and Gen Z about like the world ending, climate change, it's like what's the point of even having kids or having a 401k or having a retirement plan? Like I don't know, will the world survive tomorrow if Trump decides to start like nuclear war or something with Iran, Israel, or who knows what else? But I don't know. I guess that's getting me close to politics, which I want to stay away from. I had this question here. You had a list of your favorite writers, and you referenced Vince Gilligan. That's the guy behind Breaking Bad, right?
Yes,
He's one of
yes.
your favorite writers. Is that show specifically part of the reason why you like him so much, or something else that he's written?
Initially, that list of favorite authors didn't include any TV writers, and it just occurred to me one day that's a
Mm.
real injustice for me to leave those writers out when I consider
Yeah,
the
that's
impact
true.
that they've had on my writing career. And I think there were a couple of other people who are exclusively in TV and entertainment that I listed as well, because it's it's a travesty, honestly, sometimes that people forget. All of the best shows and all of the best movies had to be written. People sometimes just think of it as a visual media only, and
Right.
I
Mm.
I really identify as a new generation of writers who's drawn so much of his linguistic influence from this visual media. And I do have favorite authors, and I do love to read. But yeah, I've been every bit as inspired by some of the movies I've seen, movies and shows.
Nice. You also had F. Scott Fitzgerald on the list. What's your favorite writing from him?
Probably going to be boring and just say The Great Gatsby.
Gatsby, yeah.
Yeah, I
That
love
is a
that book.
beautiful book.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, like, stunningly poetically written. The capturing the zeitgeist of the jazz age is just so interesting. Have you read any of his other novels, like The Beautiful and the Damned or, what is it, This Side of Paradise? Have you read any of those?
I've read one or two of his short stories, but neither of those
Mm,
books that you mentioned. In ninth and 10th grade, there were quite a lot of authors and books that were just hugely impactful for me. And I remember Great Gatsby was one that our 10th grade English teacher introduced us to. And yeah, from the beginning, like you mentioned, just what he does with imagery and even up until the end too. I'll never forget the closing paragraph of that book.
yeah. I, recently went to a ice cream place in St. Louis, and they had, like, a bunch of Gatsby-themed, drinks, but they missed which I thought would have been awesome was, having some kind of, like a root beer float, have some float drink, for the end of Great Gatsby, which spoiler alert, but at this point, if you haven't read it or seen the movie,
Right.
like, whatever. It's ruined, sorry. You also had, Neil Gaiman, any thoughts on him with this kind of, like, Me Too reckoning? Does that change how much do you think artists or, like, can you separate the artist from the art or vice versa?
Did you happen to see the article I wrote a month or two ago called "The Artist and the Art"?
Oh, no, I didn't.
That's
Might have been
well,
germane to this conversation, though.
yes, yes. Well, to answer your question, I think that I'm a pretty big absolutist as far as the artist and the art goes. There's such thing as an exception that can be made, but even as a Jew, I'm sometimes remiss to deny that Hitler had some art talent. I would feel weird putting it up on my wall, but if one of my friends,
That would be
if one of
funny. "Hey, where's that art
if
from?" "Oh, is it Hitler?"
right, right. If if one of my friends presented to me a portrait that he'd drawn and it was one of those Hitler portraits, I would say, "Wow, that's really good. You've got a future in this." But yeah, at the same time, you don't sit down and appreciate the works of Hitler in that way. It's
Yeah,
but
right.
but for Harry Potter, I think is a better example for me, where there's nothing that J.K. Rowling could ever say or do that would remove what those stories have meant for me throughout my life. Um, Neil Gaiman similarly.
Okay. You also wrote somewhere that, you almost played the part of Max in Where the Wild Things Are. Were you really, were you, like, auditioning?
Yeah, I got a call back, and I was one of the few people who did. And if I had
Oh,
spent just
damn.
a few more minutes rehearsing my lines, my life would have been very different. It's
Yeah.
funny. I still remember looking back on going out the door before the audition, and my dad asking, "Are you sure you don't want to put in another just like 10 or 15 minutes?" I'm just like, "Nah, I'm good. I got this." And it was a very nerve wracking audition. I feel like I drew a bit of a blank on the spot and didn't
Oh,
have it
damn.
memorized quite as well as I did an hour prior. And
Okay.
oh well,
I
would
had
have
a
been a
similar
very different
experience
life.
with I had a similar experience with spelling bees. I was really good at spelling as a kid,
Yeah.
and then I accidentally like won the school spelling bee twice, and I didn't really want to because that entailed like going to the district spelling bee, and then I didn't study, so I would get out in like the third round of like the real, against like all the kids who really cared about spelling, and that was like their jam in life. But I always think it is kind of funny to like the idea that my parents like got ready, like rushed home to take me to this watch me in the district spelling bee and then for me to lose real fast. I was like the third one out because like they could tell I just wasn't studying or reading the words. And like the second time I had to do it, I was really upset because I was like the round I was, I was like, I was a pretty good student, so I wanted to like impress, the teachers a little bit. But then like the round, I was like, all right, I'm gonna get out this round. Like everybody in a row got out, and then I like kind of won by default or something like that. But yeah, I like that idea of like, thanks, mom and dad, for coming to something I put no effort in and failed at pretty quickly. um,
I would have always enjoyed doing a spelling bee. That was one of those things that either just
really?
didn't happen in our area, or if it did, it just went over our head, and our district didn't tell us about it. But yeah, it was kind of one of those things that I felt like only really happened in like shows and movies. And yeah, that would have been fun for me. I always like spelling.
That's interesting. They're pretty boring when you're in a district spelling bee. It's 40 kids and you got to just wait till it's your turn to spell a word you don't care about. Um, Yeah, I was always really good at spelling. I have this like synesthesia where like when I look at words, like the letters have like a color sensation kind of. So like I could always tell things were spelled right or incorrectly based off of like the colors. And so it's like kind it's like when people see music a little bit, it's kind of like that, but like less impressive and interesting and just being good spelling. It's like a weird little, I guess, sensation that my brain does or whatever. But let's see. You mentioned love for MGMT, I believe. You have a fondness for MGMT, the band, right?
I do, yes.
Yeah. There's been a lot of like TikTok stuff about like a this weird Gen Z nostalgia for MGMT and like millennial house parties of like the early aughts and like just the whole millennial, maybe hipster kind of aesthetic. And like one of the things that keeps coming up is like they do videos of like MGMT in like 2003 or something, just doing like house parties at whatever college they're at,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
playing
yeah.
shows before they blew up big. But it is kind of funny because, like, especially like since COVID, and then like Gen Z kids don't drink as much, and the internet's everywhere, so they're kind of like never themselves because they don't want to be caught on film being cringe or whatever. But there is this weird nostalgia for like just going to a party where people weren't just capable of filming everything, and you could kind of relax. And even like I saw something talking about DJs. They were talking about millennials are like the best people to DJ for because you're doing an event that's geared toward like Gen Z or like a club that's more Gen Z, like audience or whatever, and like just no one dances, everyone's just standing there, too cool for school. But then the DJ does something that's like like punk early, like punk 2010s, and then like all the millennials are just like living their best life, dancing like no one's looking, kind of thing. And it's funny that like it's that nostalgia that like I keep seeing like younger people have for like my like youth and like time in high school and college and things like that. I find it very interesting, but it's funny that MGMT is kind of like the linchpin of that. But
This might just be my observation, but I've felt like ever since the pandemic, there's been this major resurgence among our generation of just generalized nostalgia.
yeah, yeah, nostalgia just in general. There is something about like the millennials like straddling that like little bit of analog life still, and then like going forward, we are probably going to be the most annoying old people because telling people about like roto phones and like again like MapQuest, like we are probably going to be the most annoying people like back in my day because thing well until I guess like our grandkids become grandparents, and then when everyone's marrying robots or something, they'll be weirded out by that. I don't know.
I think Gen Alpha is going to beat us out as far as annoying grandparents go.
Yeah, it'll probably just be every succeeding generation will just be more annoying old people than the ones before them. You also mentioned a love for Simpsons Hit and Run. You wrote that, and I also really loved that game growing up. I had that on GameCube, and very fun. I used to play. I was a swimmer, and we would always, after swim practice, go and play the arcade games of what was it, Crazy Taxi or something. Where you that. It's essentially the same game, right? I'm thinking of the same game where it's
Simpsons Road
a
Rage.
Simpsons Road Rage. It's Hit and Run. Okay, I played both of them, but you're right. Road Rage is the one that's like Crazy Taxi,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Road Rage was the complete Crazy Taxi clone, and Simpsons Hit and Run was more of a GTA clone where you could actually
Yeah,
get out of
yeah,
your car and
that's
fuck
right.
around.
GTA, yeah. Very fun games, but yeah, I just thought that was funny. Super Smash Brothers, of course, obviously, I spent a lot of time playing that. Me
Did
and
you,
my
did you
brothers would play that.
did you really appreciate the cheat codes of that generation? Something I really miss in video games is the ability to just like type in a good old cheat code and have some weird ass shit happen. Because Simpsons Hit and Run was one of the
Yeah, for sure.
very,
Yeah.
very best games for that. You
Oh,
could
yeah.
just make your car go like 3 times as fast, jump in the air. Like, they're man, I miss the cheat generation. It really feels like
Yeah.
that's
I
that's
mean,
something that's kind of fallen out of favor in the world of video games for no
oh, really?
particular reason. Because that was a blast.
I don't play video games much to really notice, but I will say, like, if I'm playing Grand Theft Auto, I want RPG, or what is it? I want missile launchers and machine
Yeah,
guns. I'm not trying to
essential.
do the story and find those things and not have enough ammo to just go and like killing sprees. um, yeah, I don't know. Do you play video games a lot? I haven't really gotten into them since like I guess the GameCube days. But nowadays it's like they're so expansive and like I don't have the time for it, I guess. I'm sure it's like just as beautiful as reading a book or watching a long, in-depth, like immersive movie. Or probably even better because you can spend more like hours playing them, but you gotta
It
pick and choose what you do in life.
th- they kind of fell out of my life throughout high school. They were really big for me in middle school, but it wasn't until college and after that I had a bit of a video game resurgence. And now, as an adult, I'm very aware of it as a distinctly better alternative to spending my time scrolling. Like if when I'm on social media scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, I am destroying my brain. When
Mhm.
I'm playing video games, there is such thing as a mindless video game, but more often than not, I think that people forget the fact that you're multitasking in a way that's actually very stimulating for you. And when you're trying to beat a level, you're focusing on the 15, 20 things that you did wrong in previous runs of that same level and are just it's a very mentally taxing thing that I think a lot of people don't realize sometimes. And yeah, I distinctly feel like I'm getting sharper playing certain games as opposed to when I'm just fucking mindlessly scrolling.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I just worked this an event. It was like a big conference for Unreal, like the engine that makes
Oh
video
yeah.
games, and I had like nothing to do with the actual like video games, but I was just like putting on the event. But it's kind of fascinating. Like all the coders and all the people that come to that event and like they do talks and like find out cool things about like how to use the engine to make their video games, and they had like little kiosk and training seminars and things like that. It's definitely very interesting. I kind of have like the millennial hustle idea or delusion of like I need to economize all my interests and hobbies, and so like doom scrolling at least, which I spend way too much time doing, but at least I'm like, oh well, maybe I'll come up with like a joke I can tweet out, and it's like something productive. But then oftentimes at the end of the night at like 1:30, 2 a.m., I'm just going from tab to tab to tab, and I'm not doing anything productive, and shut the screen and like
Yeah.
bring myself out of the doom scrolling vortex that I'm in, and then finally go to bed. But I don't know. With video games, though, I like first person shooters to kill Nazis specifically. I like killing Nazi games, and then I've been playing like online Risk, which is like once every 2 or 3 weeks, I'll play a game of Risk and like play people online. And I don't know. That's like kind of stupid and not the most sophisticated game, but I don't know. It's just the strategy of it takes my mind off life a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are you playing right now? Any good games?
Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom has been the big one eating up my time recently.
Okay. Did you play
And
Ocarina of Time of
so
Zelda?
So a lot of the older Zelda games were just a bit too puzzle heavy to ever fully pull me
Okay.
interested. I'm ashamed to say, because I tried almost all of them. I had almost all of the Zelda games at one point or another, but it wasn't until Breath of the Wild on the Switch where I really felt compelled to just sit down and play that game from beginning to end. And Tears of the Kingdom, now the direct sequel, incredible game. I'm thrilled to play it on the Switch too as it arrives.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't had a Game Boy or like a handheld thing in so long. I think the last game I played was probably like Pokemon Blue, but that was I don't know, like 1999 or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I should get a Game Boy. I have some friends with Game Boys, and like I fly a lot, so maybe it'd be helpful. But again, I'm just always like, I gotta scroll and come up with joke ideas. I don't know. Just like can't get out of that hustle culture mindset. Um, let's see. I had one more thing I wanted to ask you. Um, let's see. Oh, what do you think about the commentary that we're headed toward a conservative kind of reactionary moment? That like Gen Z was a little more conservative than millennials in this election, and things like, the like trad wife culture and a lot of kind of commentary are kind of taking on a conservative element. What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting now to finally be old enough that you can see the pendulum effect of politics, where
Yeah, right.
right now it does feel like things are drifting a little bit to the right. I would say more so before the election it felt that way, and we're actually beginning to see the end of that drift. And I think that by the midterms and 2028 election, that the narrative will be very different.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Because the
Saying
note
like, will it be a lasting kind of what, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the No Kings protest, I feel like, really seems like proof that the cultural narrative is beginning to shift.
Yeah, and I think if like, for instance, like Pete Buttigieg or somebody wins in 2028, it's, and then like has that kind of like idealistic Obama style of politics of like getting people involved and wanting to care about like democracy and things like that. It's interesting. It's like things like this will only really like, the pendulum swings in different shifting cultural movements really only get decided like years later afterwards when you can kind of contextualize everything. And even then, everybody disagrees constantly and argues about shit. And it's just like who wins kind of.
I think something that's both scary and reassuring is that because culture moves so fast now and the generational gaps have gotten so small, the pendulum just swings faster and faster. And on one hand, it won't be long until it feels like the Democrats are on top again, or that we've taken control of the culture narrative. But on the other hand, like you say, if we elect Pete Buttigieg in 2028, I suspect that we'll see another Republican uprising in 2032 and vice versa in
Yeah, I think
2036.
historically we're like in an interesting spot because I don't think there's probably any moments in US history that have been so like flip flopping in terms of like George Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. It's like a very whiplash period in our
Yeah,
political system. And I don't know, like, what would get us out of it? Like, are the parties just shifting and they'll kind of get to a point where one party will just, be way more popular than the other for a little bit? It's hard to imagine. Like, I mean, with all things Trump, he's just such a chaos agent. Like, I think a big reason why Biden probably won was just like, let's have a return to normalcy a little bit. And like
yeah,
already now, it's like, Trump's like 6 months in and we're just everyone's going nuts and no one knows what he's going to do about anything revolving around
right.
tariffs or the economy, trade wars, bombing Iran, support, bombing the Houthis, peace with the Houthis, support Israel, like insert any issue that Trump just makes worse because he's an idiot and doesn't read anything and doesn't have an opinion and he's just so gullible and susceptible to like the last thing somebody told him in the moment.
Yeah, we've got such a short term memory as a country that I think that people will be very attuned to how shitty these past 4 years have been come the next election.
Yeah, but man, it's
Um,
like three
but
and a half years away still.
Yeah, it's not close.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful our democracy will survive until then. There are definitely those days when I doubt it.
Yeah, there's definitely good days and bad days. The No Kings protest was really good. A lot more people came out than like I was maybe thinking. I think it was ultimately like 5 million people.
Yeah,
But it definitely seems like there's big cracks on the Republican side of things. The way Trump is really kind of like dividing his base with like maybe starting a war with Iran. He's screwing over a lot of his own constituents who like employ a lot of illegal or undocumented immigrants. There's a lot of business owners that voted for Trump that are like, hey, my farm company or my, manufacturing company is like, mostly undocumented immigrants. And now my company's falling apart, right? So I don't know. It is the kind of thing where it's like a little bit of the dog catching the car of like, Trump's in power and he's doing all the things he said he wanted to do. And people are like, oh, that's actually terrible. The Democrats are right.
yeah.
Like our food prices will go up if we deport all of the California migrants that, pick all our fruit for cheaper than like a native born person like I would, want to be paid for doing that same work. I don't know. I guess that's it for like all the conversation topics that I had. Anything else you want to add? Anything on your mind?
I guess if I had one more closing thought on a slightly positive note, it would be that it's very easy for us to feel like we're living in a shitty time right now. If you just look at the news developments of the past couple weeks, it's really, really easy to feel that way. But because we're so tuned to look toward each threat as it arises, it's very easy to forget what remarkable times we're actually living in. And just the fact that we're able to talk to each other on a FaceTime from across the country, world, have these devices in our pockets, it's really is something that's remarkable. And I suspect that 100 years from now, people will look at the Trump administration as more of a speed bump and view the more significant story of these times as the fact that we accomplished all of this.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's definitely true. There's like the Steven Pinker line of thinking of just like actually things are really good and like way less people are in poverty than ever before. Way less
Yeah,
people die of like insert any disease.
yeah.
Way more people have the means to start companies than ever before or be
And,
famous online than ever before. Things
and
like that. There's a lot to be positive about.
and AI is very scary and it will change the workforce, but it's also decoding genomes and
Yeah,
figuring out
right.
cures to diseases and is much better at identifying tumors than certain doctors are. And it's a lot to
Maybe
be excited
AI
about.
will even like calm us down. Like the algorithms, that like are kind of employed now for our clicks and views are like putting us now in echo chambers of like paranoid delusions and like just telling us the political or religious conspiracies that we want to believe. But
Right.
maybe AI will actually, I don't know if it's like a sentient thing or maybe just like the way AI works of trying to like be a neutral force on things. Maybe it'll inadvertently calm us all down and make us more of a monoculture thing and bring us out of our rabbit hole echo chambers of personal niche delusions.
Yeah.
Hopefully. It is funny when you see like Grok on Twitter that is like disagreeing with Elon Musk,
Right.
and then Elon Musk will say things like, "Oh, we're gonna look into that or fix that," and then like it's Grok keeps going on like fact checking Elon Musk. So I mean that's a hopeful sign for AI, right? That I guess at least for now, at least one company is the crazy founder is being fact checked by his own AI. So
Yeah. If
yeah,
Elon Musk is
anything
getting
you want to
fact checked
plug?
by Grok.
You want to plug one?
Uh,
Yeah.
no, I think I've done enough talking for the
Anything you
night.
want to mention about yourself or? Okay, gotcha. All right, well, it was a good chat. Thanks for hopping on. Thanks for everybody for listening. Check out my satire. I've been on a roll pretty much, making fun of Trump and Iran and all the good things about the No Kings protest. But thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll see you in the next one.